When she said she had a few passions in life, I wasn't quite sure where that was going next. But do you know, one of the things after I had my cardiac arrest that the specialists in St Vincent's Hospital in Dublin worried about in the week or so afterwards was my mental capacity and my mental responses, because in actual fact I had been out for quite some time, to say the least of it. And this is always, as you know yourselves, a concern. So I eventually managed to persuade them that I was fine and that everything was okay. And then today I'm coming down here to Mullingar, to this hotel, which I have been involved in many functions down through the years, including presenting country music awards and all kinds of stuff like that. And what do? I drive past the friggin' thing. And I'm out looking at green fields outside Mullingar and thinking to myself, this doesn't look right. So I think I might have to go back and have that situation reassessed. Ladies and gentlemen, I suppose in a way I feel a small little bit out of place in being here, in the sense that I didn't actually do anything at the beginning of June when I had my cardiac arrest. So I can't come here and tell you this is what you should do and this is this and that's that, because to be honest with you, I knew nothing about it. But the thing about it is, and the reason that I am here and to tell you my story, and for those of you who you may know this already, so forgive me if I'm trotting on old ground again, but I think it's important because what saved my life was the reaction of other people to it. People that weren't trained in CPR, or they're not first responders or anything like that, but just did the right thing when it was needed to be done. For those of you who don't fully know the story, let me briefly recap to you again. At the beginning of June, I was down in Galway playing golf with a good friend of mine, Vincent Hogan from the Irish Independent. And Vincent had driven down because he let me have a pint or two, and he decided he wouldn't bother. So we played our golf and we had something to eat, and we didn't stay long because I knew from some of my mates down there that this thing was going to be a fairly long night, and didn't want to be keeping Vincent. So we came back, and I think we got back to Dublin sometime after midnight or 12:30. And when I got into the house, I suddenly realised I had left my mobile phone in Vincent's car. And I have to be honest now, I'm not one of those people who was kind of married to my mobile phone, but at the same time you still feel that you need it. You need it the next day. And I could easily have gone over to his house and collected the thing, but I reckoned he wasn't too far away. So I jumped onto the house phone and rang him. I said, Vinny, if you're not gone too far, phone. So he said, yeah. He said, I'm just down the road, I'll turn back. And that's the last thing that I remember. What Vincent would tell you is when he got back to the house, I was lying on the floor in the hallway, or half in the hallway and half in the downstairs loo. And I can remember, while I was waiting for Vincent, I remember opening the front door and popping into the loo because I knew it would take him 2 or 3 minutes to get down. And that was it. That was the end of that as far as I was concerned. So Vincent came back to the house and found this situation. And he immediately called upstairs because my wife was in bed. So he called Anne down and she arrived on the scene. Now the one thing that kind of concerns me slightly about this entire situation is, and I think this kind of maybe unfortunately puts into context what my wife and what my good friends think about me. Because when Vincent came back to the house, his first impression was that I was just messing, lying on the ground. As I do at 1 o'clock in the morning, so throw myself down on the ground in the hallway. And then he calls Anne, and Anne comes down, and she looks at me, and she assumes I'm pissed. Sorry about that, Anne, lying in the hall again, yeah. So anyway, happily, they ruled out both of those things fairly quickly, for a change. And then Anne went into action, and Vincent obviously as well. And this is why I'm saying to you that this is so important. And I talked to Andy about this recently, about doing something. Anne or Vincent don't have any CPR training. Ironically, I do, because I have my diplomas and certificates and all that, and took an opportunity through a course in RTE to do that a couple of years ago. But unfortunately, I wasn't much help to myself in the situation, so I did actually rely on. But the thing about it is, even though Anne had no training, she had enough cop on to know that there were some basics that she could do while Vincent was ringing the ambulance and so on. And she did enough in the course of the next 10 minutes to buy me time for things to be sorted out. Now, I have to, I suppose, acknowledge that in this case I got, well, two lucky breaks. First of all, that Vincent Hogan came back to the house. And the other thing about it is the ambulance station is just up the road from our house. It's about 5 minutes away or 6 minutes away. So I suppose if this happened to me down in the back end of Kerry or Galway or something else, I might have had a different problem. And the crew arrived on the scene like very, very quickly. Despite that, they still had a job of work to do because I wasn't really showing any signs of being bothered returning to this life. So they had to work fairly hard and fairly long before I finally showed some response to it. At the head of that ambulance crew was in fact Andy O'Toole. I don't know, where's Andy? Andy, is there any of the other crew members here today?
Yeah, Katrina's here, she might stand up there.
Where's Katrina?
Yeah, thank you.
I have actually spoken to Andy in more recent times, but Katrina, it's great to see you obviously here as well, and take this opportunity, slightly belated I have to be honest, but to thank you and the crew for the fine job you did that night, because I can tell you I was in extra time at that stage. I was gone into Fergie time, I think, before I was eventually pulled around. It was a bit like the Mayo footballers actually, where it was going on. Yeah, I reckon there'll be a few people here from either Mayo or Galway. It's going to be real ironic, you know, in the National League campaign that's on at the moment. Mayo are going to get relegated from Division 1 and they're going to be replaced by Galway from the way things are looking at the moment. But anyway, that's another story. And that basically, folks, was what happened to me on the night. And it had, obviously, a happy conclusion from my point of view. Since then, a lot of people have asked me how this has affected me personally. And, you know, have I changed my life? Have I found God, or, you know, become a different kind of person? And I suppose I haven't really, in the sense that this was my second episode of cardiac trouble. Because in 2012 I had heart failure. So that event, and it was obviously a very different type of event, but that was one where you assessed things in your life and you did all the things back then that, or most of the things anyway, that I was supposed to do. Looked after myself better, I'm on a lot of medication, but as well as that, watching my diet, taking a bit of exercise, watching my alcohol consumption, not as well as my heart specialist thinks I am, but anyway. And all those things. So I was genuinely ticking the boxes and doing 90% of the things that you should do to look after yourself. And that's why this other event, the cardiac arrest, came very much out of the blue, given the fact that my health, oddly enough, was an awful lot better last June than it would have been the June 12 months before that or 12 months before that. So it just goes to show you, obviously, you don't know when these things are going to happen and how they're going to happen. But the other thing that has occurred over the last number of months with me is that I have become involved in events like this, and also things like, for instance, Andy was talking to you there about defibrillators. I'm going down next week to my own home GEA club in Galway, down to Killererden, where the club are installing a defibrillator in the clubhouse, and they're doing that partly prompted by what happened to me. So they're asking me to go down and just be there for the launch of all that, which obviously I'm happy to do. And you know, in little ways you kind of look at things, and again, we were talking in RTE, we had a cup of coffee, myself and Andy there a few weeks ago, and you were actually looking at the defibrillator in the sports department. The defibrillator is working properly because obviously the company that supplies these things to RTE looks after that. But I was saying this to my wife only the other day, that, and again, I have to be honest, I'm not sort of on a campaign about this, but it's a bit remiss of me not to remind myself and to remind others. Does anybody in the sports department, or how many people in the sports department, actually know how to work the defibrillator? I do, because as I said, I did the first responder training, but then I actually don't need the defibrillator now at this stage, because I have my own personal one. But, you know, I suppose really what I'm saying here is you kind of, something happens in your life and things go on and you kind of say, oh geez, I must do something about it at some stage. So it's kind of a little bit of a, even being here today, a resolve to myself to say, the next day I'm in RTE next week, I must actually bring this thing up. You kind of half don't like bringing things up because it sounds like, here's my heart problem story again, kind of, you know. But at the same time, I realised, you know what, I actually should do this. I should just get people's heads together about who can operate the thing or show them how to operate it and have a list on the wall or a contact list to say, if something happens, this is the person that you go to. Outside of that, folks, I think the other part of all of this that is important to stress, and it's been stressed, I know, by other people who've spoken to you here today, and that is, there is actually something that you can do here. That's the good thing about this. It's not a case that you can't do anything. You can do something. It's doing, as Anne did, the right thing in the moment. A few years ago, a very good friend of mine from County Carlow passed away from cancer. Myself and Enda used to rally drive together, and I can tell you we had some laughs and we had some fun and some adventures in the rally car. But Enda unfortunately got a very aggressive form of cancer, and I was actually sitting at the end of his bed on the day that he died. His family rang me and said, you know, he's going downhill here, and I went down and we sat and we chatted, and it was very, very disturbing, because you knew there was no hope for this man, and worse, he knew it. And not a very pleasant place to be for him or the family, obviously, or anything else. And there was nothing that could be done for Enda. But there is something that can be done for a person who suffers a cardiac arrest. And the only thing then, the next box that has to be ticked is, are you able to do it? Have you even just the common sense to do something? After I got my diploma in first aid and all that, I used to be going around the place thinking to myself, you know the way this would happen, you'd say, if somebody actually collapsed in the street here, would I be able to do something? I mean, I know I've been trained, but would I do the right thing in the moment? And the funny thing is, from seeing what Anne did and what Vincent did in my case, I actually now know, yes, I actually would. Because now I know, do something, with or without the training. In actual fact, we talked about this recently, Andy, and Andy was making the point, you can't make the situation worse. I know I'm telling you guys things that you already know already, but I think it's important that we keep reminding ourselves of that message, and even just keep telling other people and getting the message out to other people about how all of this works out. So I am thrilled to be part of this event here today, folks. Thank you very much for listening to me. And once again, a huge thanks to Andy for asking me along. Yeah?
The person that sent us to you that night from dispatches here as well, Angela Sheridan, the control dispatcher, might stand up here.
Where's Angela? Well, thank you, Angela, and I know this is stating the obvious, but it goes without saying to all of you guys, I wouldn't be here today without you. Thank you, folks.